so let's take your own personal experience if you are willing, because I think a lot of us have, risky decisions. You have to
Yeah.
decide whether you got a proposal, and you had to decide whether you would take it. And I was hoping you could talk about, because you talk about emotions and social circles and feelings, and perhaps even a fear of failure because you had gotten divorced earlier,
Yes.
um, and self awareness, intuition. Like, how did
Hmm.
all those factor into your equation in deciding?
Sure. Well, so, okay, I suppose that this is one of these stories where 5 years from now, people are either going to call it really romantic or really stupid.
Okay.
Because, my boyfriend at the time, after only 6 weeks, asked me to marry him.
Whoa. Okay.
And, it was funny. The first time he asked me, I thought he was kidding. And he got really offended. He's like, nope, I intend to marry you if you'll have me. And I was like,
Wow.
uh, and yet, that would have been in other relationships, that would have been a red flag where I would have been like, yeah, I think you're a little bit too into me.
Right.
I think we gotta end this now because you're creeping me out.
Right.
But it didn't with him. So even when he said it,
Interesting.
and I was like, "Whoa," there was something in the back of my head that was saying, "Wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't discount this right away."
Right.
But yes, I'm a type A personality. I hate to fail at anything. My parents were married, until my father passed away, and they had a very successful, very happy marriage. I wanted the same thing. The fact that I hadn't found it the first time around, was it was hurtful to me. I felt like I had poor judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I had a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want him falling in love with somebody too that was going to end up disappointing me. So, and of course, my mother was pretty close by, whispering in my
Right.
ear, "Oh. Um, so, again, it was important to me. I wanted to be in another, romantic partnership. And it was really important to me that it be a partnership as opposed to kind of a one-sided, antiquated 1950s kind of marriage.
Right.
I wanted someone, to help me raise my son. And my boyfriend had a daughter as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted somebody who was going to want to make a family and not kind of split things down the middle. There were a lot of factors at play. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's one of these stories where, we did get married. Uh, we waited 4 months, though. Four
Right.
months. Um,
Good for you.
but I put him through the paces. I asked him, I think, every possible, like, you know, um, marital stressing kind of situation. What would you do if you did this? What if I, am paralyzed in a car
Mm-hmm.
accident and you have to help me
Wow.
go to the bathroom? Or what
Wow.
about, if one of our children gets caught, breaking into the police station to steal evidence? I mean, I was like, going through
Wow.
every ridiculous scenario with him to see how he would react. But ultimately, my gut feeling was this is somebody who's going to stick it out with you. This is somebody you enjoy being around. This is someone your son enjoys being around. You can make this, as much as anybody can predict anything about marriages, you can make this work.
Yeah.
So the thing that people don't realize is that there's such a lag in book publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So we've now been married for 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
And
Okay.
so I guess we're getting
That is a
close to
huge
where it's
lag.
a romantic story instead
Yeah.
of just a crazy story.
Right. Right.
But people still say when they hear the 6 weeks, they're like, "What is he nuts? How did you not run away from him and be like, stay away from me, creeper?" Um,
Wow. Okay. So here's what's so interesting about that story, right? So you so practice and planning came into play, right? So these are some things. So one of the things that you recommend in your book or that you suggest is you actually have people who say, the neurosurgeon and the trained, I don't know, people in the military. The
right.
reason they can do things is they actually have practice and planning that goes into making a good decision. And so what I love about your process and what I actually did with my marriage because I'm a high planner type of person. I don't leave anything up
To
to
chance.
yeah,
Yeah.
nothing up to chance. And so I had my dear friend had gotten divorced after maybe 6 or 7 months, and I said if you could ask the questions that you now knowing what you know, what are the questions that you would have asked before you got married. And he
Mm,
had a really long set of questions that have to do like with bank accounts. What do you do with bank accounts? And
right.
all these kinds of really gnarly, hard to ask questions. Just like, what would you do? I mean, I wish I had known those questions that you just mentioned. And, because I think that those are reality based questions. If some,
Yeah.
if I'm in a wheelchair, you're going to take care of me. Like, what's going to
Yeah.
happen when these things, or if my kid's that not your genetic kid, these are the kind of questions that you want to ask. And so, to me, it's all about practice and planning. So tell us what you found about when you talked to Eric Dane. I hope we're pronouncing his name right.
Yes.
When he's a professor at Bryce, what did he say about risk and planning and practice?
Right. So he talked a lot about something that's called deliberate practice, which is, sort of practicing something at the edge of your performance ability. And certainly if you look at musicians and athletes, this is really important. They practice to the point of failure, and then they do it over and over and over again. And what that does is it really syncs up your brain with the world around you.
Mm-hmm.
So things become very automatic.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of practice and planning for the rest of us, if you think about, if we go back to that 3 pounds of silly putty in our head, trying to predict what's next, taking all these shortcuts, it wants to try to automate as many processes as possible. It wants to, have the lower level systems take over.
Mm-hmm.
So your experience and training really help.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of the marriage thing, I could say I've learned a lot, especially about what I don't want in a partner from my first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
What is absolutely a deal breaker for me. Before that, I didn't know what it was like to be married. I
Right.
just didn't. Or to co-parent.
Right.
So, I learned a lot of things and put them into practice. But in terms of, every day, whether it's taking a new job or picking up a new sport or whatever else, there's no substitute for doing the homework,
Right.
for doing the work and learning how to do it so that when your brain does fall back on these automatic processes, it only has the best automatic processes to fall back on.
Right. Because you've actually,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
So
because
that's what we found.
you know the situation. Why are, Army Special Forces operators so good in missions? How do they work so well together? It's because they train and train and train to the point of failure.
I met a guy
How,
in a class who said he's actually one of these special forces guy, and they said that they actually took a wooden box and they put him in the box, and they kept him in the box for like 2 or 3 weeks where he had no food, no water, nothing. And it's why? So that they can figure out whether he's going to freak out if he's
or not.
actually in those kind of situations, because that training was actually critical to figure out what would happen when he was under duress.
Mm. And we see this with the scientific method, basic stuff for all of our innovation in science and technology. It's iterative. It's over and over again. Try things till they failed and try a different path until it, and it's really important for knowledge and automaticity. So planning and preparation, why is it that Steph Davis, that base jumper and free solo climber, can do what she does? It's because she is such an experienced, climber.
Right.
And while she may have some kind of genetic predisposition that makes her more physically fit or helps her deal with stress a little better or makes her need more stimulation, none of that matters if she's not up there practicing and really, honing these links between her body, her mind, and the world around her in that particular in her sport of interest. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I think, that's the thing. We talk about Michelle and her job. She also was doing her homework.
Right.
Okay, what would it be like if I moved there? Who would I be working with? What would I be doing? A lot of that information, you can't leave it to chance.
Yeah, and
You
I think
really
actually from coaching, I find that all the
yeah,
time. Like I'll say, well, you're interested in becoming a lawyer. Have you actually talked to lawyers? Do you know what they
yeah,
do? Would you actually job shadow a lawyer? Because you don't really even know what you're getting into. So do the homework and the planning and the preparation so you have more sense of the expected outcomes so that you
right,
can actually plan around it. Because what happens if you like it or don't like it? Could you take an internship? So if you don't like it, you'll have a
right,
path out. Those kind of things. I want to go back to something else you said about your mom, because
yes.
that's an example of a social circle where your mom's like, really, honey? I'm sure she's like, what you're describing. So, so
Uh,
how did
my poor
you,
mom, because she was like, well, maybe you should wait a while,
yeah,
and I was
6 weeks
like,
is not
well,
long.
but mom, you said that it's not right, to date in front of the kids. And, if I'm serious, I
Yeah.
should. And then she's like, ah. So she got kind of caught in her own trap. But no, I mean, our social circles really do. One of the greatest predictors of whether or not you'll take a risk is how familiar you are with that risk. So certainly that goes back to practice and planning, but it also, how does somebody like, Steph Davis start climbing? She's around people who climb and love it and introduce her to it.
Right.
How do we, and so much of that we don't realize it really is situational.
Hmm.
And the example I love to give, I live in Texas now, but I grew up in the Northeast. And so, even when I was 10, 11 years old, I was taking the subway in New York City by myself.
Hmm.
And people hear that and they think, well, one, that my parents should be arrested. But they're like, oh my gosh, it's so dangerous. They really
Yeah.
think that having a Metro card is basically, an invitation to be mugged or worse.
Right.
And they think it's so dangerous and so risky. But now you take that hardcore seasoned New Yorker, the guy who's on the subway all the time at all hours of the night, but then you put him in a rental car in the middle of Wisconsin.
Right.
Now watch and see who's freaking out. How do you guys get on these highways all the day? Like, why do you need so many lanes? What's going on with this? Or, they get directions somewhere in the country that says, like, oh, go up about, half a mile and then turn left at the chicken. And they're
Right.
like, who turns left at a chicken? Give me a subway stop.
Exactly. So I think one of the questions that you ask, which I think are great, is like, so how are these situational things, or in the case of the social thing, how are the social circles helping you consider all the elements? I love these questions. Are the social circles that you're around stuck on certain variables that may lead you astray, right? So
Right.
the whole person who's like, oh, yeah, someone in Austin may not think actually going on a subway is prudent, but that's because they're in Austin and they're not used to,
Yep.
taking a subway as an everyday occurrence. And so the variables that are leading them astray is knowing how safe the
Mm.
subway is. And are they allowing transparency and challenges to the status quo? Are they allowing transparency and challenges to the status quo? So how do you know? Like, unless you actually are living in New York, maybe you would. In fact, my friend has a 5-year-old who actually takes the subway.
Mhm.
So, I mean, kind of depends. And are you closed off to any criticism? So these are kind of
Well,
the questions that I think were important.
and I think it is important because, especially, we get into our groups and we love our groups, right? They're our
Right.
families, our churches, our communities. They hold the same values. They think the same things are important. But that's the thing. You can sort of end up in this, like, repetitive, not vicious cycle, but it's almost like a repeat feedback loop, right?
Right.
You're just hearing back your questions back and forth. And so it makes you think that something is maybe riskier or a bad idea or a good idea when it's not.
Yeah.
So I think that when you consider your social circle, it's exactly those questions.
Right.
Do you have people? Is there transparency? Is there ability to say, "Hey, wait a minute, I actually don't know if the subway has anybody here actually been on the subway?"
Right.
You know, and if the answer is, "Oh, my, cousin's wife's mother-in-law's hairdresser's dog groomer, she went on once and got mugged." That's probably not the right answer that probably tells you not getting the information you need
Right.
to make a really good decision for that particular thing. They may know everything in the world about pie making or about whatever else,
Right. But don't
but
ask about subways in New
but don't
York.
ask about the
Cherry
subway.
pies, yes. Subways, no.
Exactly.
But I think that that's actually really important because I think that oftentimes we actually, one of the things that you mentioned, we go to supposed authorities to ask them questions about what to do. Should I go to my favorite professor or the priest in my church and say, should I actually take this
Hmm.
job? And whatever they say is like, oh, well, that must be, God has ordained it. The professor has ordained it. I must do this. And it's really like, yeah, but understand their particular biases. And I think
Right.
that that's actually super important. God, I wish I had like 2 hours. I've only gone through two out of like my 4 pages. We're at
Well, I can always come
7.
back again.
We should
So
have you on back again. So we've been talking. Thank you so much. This is so fascinating. Really, I wrote a blog post because I so wanted to have this information, and I thought it was so critical because there's so many factors of which we've touched upon in an appetizer fashion on all these. We've been talking to Kayt Suke, talking about her book, The Art of Risk, of which all of the different you can read all the different factors and be entertained by her stories, entertained entertained and mesmerized by the data, the stories as well. Tell me where you can go to your website so folks want to actually buy the book and learn more about your work.
Sure. So the book is available wherever books are sold. Of course, it's on Amazon. Amazon actually made it a best business and leadership book a few months back.
Woohoo! Yay!
But of course, Barnes and Noble. And if you have a favorite indie bookstore, please go to your favorite indie bookstore because I
Yeah.
love favorite indie bookstores.
Yay.
But also, you can find out more about me at kaytsukel.com, KaytSukel.com. It's a weird spelling. And of course, you can always find me on Twitter at Kayt Sukel, KaytSukel. And I'd love if you say hi.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.